Hey, how's it going guys? Daniel here, aka HashLips, and welcome back to yet another continuation of the A to Z Minting a Dapp tutorial. Up until this point, we went into Photoshop and created our various characters. They look like this, just if you haven't seen it yet. Then, what we've done is actually split up all the layers of the characters into respective folders, and we will call these layers. I've then went ahead and renamed the shirt to clothing and clothing logo for the shirt logos. I then went ahead and split up all the attributes into each one of these folders so that they're nice and neatly organized. We're going to be using this in the Minting Dapp. So what you want to do next is go to your browser and type in github/HashLips generative art open source, and we're going to be focusing on the v3 branch. If you don't know how to get to the branch, you can click on this icon over there and just select the v3 branch to make sure you're on the latest code. Now click on the code icon and copy this link. You can open your Visual Studio or any code editor of your choice, and now we're going to clone the repo in here. For this step, make sure that you've got Git installed on your machine, Node.js, Yarn, Truffle as well, and also Ganache CLI. Going forward, what we can do is we can basically say File, and let's say Open. We're basically going to go to the desktop and create a new folder. We will call this Minting, or let's call this rather the collection. Perfect. Let's open this collection file and say it's fine. We want to open a new terminal, and inside this terminal, what you want to put in is git clone, and then paste that link that you just copied from the GitHub repository. Hit enter and see the magic happen where the GitHub repo gets cloned onto your machine, and once that's on our machines, we can then run it. The repo might open in the master branch, so we might have to switch to the correct branch again, but that's fine. We will switch it and make sure that we're running the code on the correct branch. This is very important because the most up-to-date code lives on the v3 branch. So now what we want to do is here where it says main on the left-hand bottom corner, click there and then just switch to the origin v3. Once you've done that, you can see that our code repo is now here. Now you can cd into this repo if you want to, or you can just reopen it. So I like to reopen it, go and open it again on your IDE so that we know that the terminal that we're going to be running is going to run directly in the root of this folder. A lot of you had issues at this point when running commands such as yarn add all. So if you have Node installed, what you can say is npm install yarn. By running this command, you'll install yarn, and we need yarn as a dependency, while as a library and a functional tool to actually pull in the rest. I prefer using yarn because it just works much better with dependencies. So what you want to go ahead and do now is actually say yarn add all. This will grab all the dependencies that sits here in your package.json file. The only dependencies that we really need is canvas, and that's it. Because we've ran yarn install, yarn is going to be added here now, but this won't be there for you. Anyway, this is the only dependency that we really need in this repo, so once everything is done, we're ready to rock, and we can actually start running this program. Now that you've installed all the dependencies, you probably want to make sure that your code is running successfully. You can test it out by now running node index.js. Assuming that you do have Node installed, it's quite important, this will work. So you can run this and it should start to execute and build actually the new layers in the output folder. So let's give it a second and see what happens. For the first time that you run this code, it might take some time because it's basically trying to, how can I say, commit stuff to the cache and then run successfully. But anyway, once you start minting, it should go quite fast. Now, I think this is set to only create 10 NFTs, and as you can see, it is doing it. It is finding a lot of DNA that exists, which is fine. It means the program is doing its job. It's finding DNAs and making sure they are unique. And we just have very little layers in the input file for it to really not find any DNAs, any matching DNAs this often. So basically, in our output file, we have got the new NFTs over there. And you can see this is from the Lunar Landings collection that we've done in the previous tutorial. And this is what's existing on the repo. But now we want to change this and create our own collection. Let's go ahead and do that. The first thing that we can do is actually get rid of all these NFTs in the output file, move them to the trash. We can also clear out this metadata.json just to make sure we have a clean file. Then in your input folder, you want to go and copy over all your layers. I'm going to go ahead and remove all the layers that's already in here. So we only have the input folder and our config.js. Let's go and open our layers file and drag all of our layers in here too. Once all of the layers are there, we need to make sure that we go and reference them inside our config.js file. Let's go and reference all of the files so that we can make sure that this will run. Because we don't have a background layer in our inputs folder, we need to kind of render it. Luckily, the code has an easy way for us to add a simple background. So if we go to the index.js file, scroll to the bottom where you can see the draw background function and uncomment it so that it does get called before it starts rendering all the elements. This will allow the application to basically give you a base light pastel background for you to start with. Now, after you've done this, you can close the index.js file, go to the config.js again. We're going to ignore these top few attributes, which we'll do update and we'll change it before we try and create our collection. But we want to focus on connecting all the layers to our race weights and our races object. Now, our NFT doesn't consist of races, but you can still use this project without races. We don't have to have these fancy, barbaric, alien, robot races. Although I do have those attributes, my base race isn't going to be determined by weights. In order for me to do that, I can simply use the code with only one object in the race weight and set it to 1 or from 1 to the edition size. Meaning that this current code will render something called skull, and it will use the skull attribute here in our races object, and it will render from 1 to the edition size, which is 10. If we had more races, I'm just going to close this object here in the races object. If we had more races such as alien, we would put the alien race in there and call it alien. We would also then make sure that this value is the same as an alien race that we will create down here, that has the same attributes as skull or maybe different attributes. We would then go ahead and maybe render the skull from 1 to 100 and start with the alien race from 101 to the edition size to the end, which would most probably be a higher number then. But basically, we don't want to do that in our collection. I'm going to remove this, put this back to the edition size, and then change the skull to a nerd. Now, our race is going to be nerd. I'm only going to have one race type, so I'm going to remove it and only have to edit this object and link it to these layers on the left. So what I can do next is open up this object and also change this to say nerd as the name for this layers of this race. And then in the body over here, also change my PNG base to nerd. It was previously called humanoid. Now that we've got this set up, we can move on to the layers. You'll see that each race has a layers object, and in each layer there's these basic layers that represent each folder inside this input structure. So all I'm doing now is minimizing them and removing it so that I can get to only have one in our array. And the reason for that is I want to make sure that you guys understand how it looks like, how one layer looks like before I move on to the rest. I'm going to also remove this extra attribute in this elements array. What you see here in front of you, if I close and open it, this is one layer, and this information right here is what we need for each one of these folders. Like I mentioned, we don't have a background, so we need to change this into our body folder. I'm going to go ahead and call this body. Now think about this name over here as the trait type, and then any one of these element objects in here, the name, if it's selected for this NFT, would be the trait type's value. That's why I'm going to call this the nerd body type, and we're only going to have one body type. It looks like this. Next, what we want to do is actually point to where this exists. So it's going to be in the body folder, and then obviously its name is just called nerd.png. Once we've set this up, we're ready to go with our first attribute. Like I mentioned, our body is only going to have one attribute, so we would probably leave it just as is and start with our next layer. But I want to take a brief second and explain what this weight is and how the rarity works of these rate ratios. I see that some of the YouTubers try to explain this repo to a few people, and they unfortunately got this concept a bit wrong. When adding more and more attributes, like so, you can't keep the weight the same. You can't say that this needs to be there 100% of the time, 100% of the time, and 100% of the time. What will end up happening is it would choose the last element. The reason for this is that these values of the weights need to change from a high to low fashion. For instance, this would work if you say 80 and this should be 60. But this does not mean that this attribute over here gets selected 80% of the time and this attribute gets selected 60% of the time. The way you work it out is you imagine a top level over here at 100, and you imagine that at the bottom of the array there's an invisible 0. In order to get each attribute's true percentage value that it will appear in your collection, you have to minus this by the next attribute. So 100 minus 80 leaves us with 20%. Okay? And that's basically how it works. 100 minus 80 is 20. Then you take the next one. 60 minus 80 is also 20. Alright? And then you take the next one. 60 minus 0 is 60. And that would be 60%. Now, ideally, you would not want your percentages to be low to high, like I mentioned. You want it to go from low to high and high to low, starting from the top ones going to the bottom. How can you do that in a way where you know that the last ones that you've placed in your array is going to be the most rarest attributes. Let's clear these percentages out, and let me give you an example, and then you can go and apply it to your own project. Please remember that whatever weights you enter here, they all always need to be different from each other, and they all calculated together needs to be at least underneath 100. So you can't have 100, 80, and over the top calculations, so 102 and so on, right? You can't make this 140, for instance. At the end of the day, it won't work. If you want to use higher percentages, you need to go to the index.js file. If you scroll up to where the random value is being created, if you change this to 200, then you can actually use any percentage value up to 200, right? Because it's going to give you an integer up to 200. But we work with hundreds so that it makes it easier for us to work with percentages. All right. Perfect. Let's carry on. And now I need to, let's just close all. Let's save that. Boom. There we go. So now let's look at how we can rectify this and get a much better value ratio out of our layers. Like I said, these can't be the same, and they all need to be underneath this 100 value, right? So let's start off by looking at how we can accomplish this. I usually start from the bottom and work my way up. I usually import all my layers and say that the last layer should be 5%. I can give it a 5 as a weight because I know that 5 minus 0 is going to be indeed 5%. And then what I like to do is just comment the percentage that that weight carries. The reason for this is so that I can get a top level view of how rare an attribute would be. Next, I say that the next attribute I want to be 10%, for instance. Then I simply go and I take this and add 10 to it. So it means that my next weight should be 15 if I want the value to be 10%. Because 15 minus 5 is 10, and that's how you get the percentage. And so on and so on. Let's go and finish these up and see how we can get more weights sorted. So let's say the next one, I really want this attribute to maybe be 30% of the collection. It means that I need to add 30 to the 15, and that would give us 45. So we can say then 45 minus 15 is 30. Yes. And that's how it works, right? And then we can work out the remainder. Remember, we can't go over 100. So the remainder would be 100 minus 45, which is then what, 55. So the rest would always be 55% choosing this top attribute. And that's how you work out rarities. So if you get stuck, please refer to this and just work it out like that. That is a bit more complicated way, but this works, and once you've set it up once, you'll find it easier every time to use. I'm going to take out the invisible 100 and the invisible 0, but you guys can leave the percentage comments so that you know exactly how many times this attribute will show up in your collection. Lastly, I'm just going to remove these now, because like we said, we want this to be 100%. So if we only have one attribute and we leave it at 100, this means that it will show up 100% of the time. Perfect. Let's move on and look at what's next in our layer orders so that we can set up the rest of the layers. Keeping in mind that we want to order these layers in the array exactly the same as how we would like to render them. If you can recall, on Photoshop, we actually organized our layers in the order that we want everything to be minted in and created in. So we first had our base, then our t-shirt, then shirt logo, and so on. We're now going to implement the rest of these layers on our code so we make sure that it renders in the right order. We have one layer and one element in our collection. We can technically run this if we go to the top and change the edition size to 1 and end at to 1 and obviously start from to 1. It means that we'll render one NFT, but if we run the program here at the bottom, run node space index.js, you will see that it actually creates an edition of a node. We can check it and verify it here in the output file, and there it is. There's our base image with our body shape and a background. Now the background was rendered dynamically with code, and then we placed this on top of it. If we try and render any more, we would start finding that we have problems because we don't have that many variations. So if I make the edition size bigger and I run this, we would hit into a problem where there isn't enough layers to render. Let's just go and update that. So we have the edition size, and we say the edition needs to end at the edition size, which is 3 as well. And now we're going to render it. You'll see that it says DNA exists, and it does it in an endless loop. That is not good. It means usually that we don't have enough layers. And this is the answer that I kept on giving people because they found that they can only render up to a certain level up until their program breaks. And this is exactly why. So let's go and add the rest of the layers. Like we've seen, we need the clothing layer next. So I'm going to go ahead and add this layer. I'm going to do this clothing layer with you so you can completely understand how I do this, and then you can go and add them by yourselves. I click on this arrow on the left hand side every now and then, and that's just to close the object. Otherwise I need to perfectly find out where it starts and ends. So that's why I rather close it and copy these two brackets and paste it. That means that I've copied the whole object and I didn't miss anything. So what we want to do is say the next thing is going to be the clothing, and then we're going to have a few layers in here. Now for me, I have to organize the rarities at this point, and our collection alien would be the rarest. Then we'll get maybe zombie and vampire, and then we'll go up the ranks. So it's all up to you how you want to separate these out. But yeah, so a very good idea over here is to copy the layer's name, because you don't want to make a mistake at this point. It will just eliminate a lot of the risks that you will follow if you don't do this. All right. So what I did first is I copied and pasted whatever I needed to for the layer. So for instance, the alien suit, I said this is going to be alien suit. This is in the clothing section. That sounded weird, but this is the clothing folder, and it will find it here. Now this is perfect, and ID is 0. From this point onwards, I'm not going to add the IDs yet. I just want to get all the attributes in here, and then I'll organize them. So like I said, the next one is our hoodie. So you put it in there. I capitalize only the name, and then the rest I keep the same. And we leave the weight 100. And we're going to continue doing this for the rest of this layer. I'm going to quickly do that and then come back to you where we're going to sort out the rarities. I've added all these layers, and we have about, 6, 7. So we have about 7 layers over here, which is perfectly fine. Well, 7 attributes, sorry, these are the layers, but we have 7 attributes in the clothing layer. At this point, they are not sorted by rarity, and that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to always consider my alien to be the rarest. So I'm going to put alien at the bottom. Then it will be zombie, and then I want it to be vampire, if there is a vampire attribute. Some of these layers don't always have the vampire, zombie, and alien attributes, but they have the rest. But next, I want this hoodie to actually be just after vampire. And then the yellow t-shirt, the purple t-shirt, they can also be below the white t-shirt, because I believe the white V-neck t-shirt should be the least rare and the most common. Now, like I explained with the IDs, you need to populate them once you're happy with your rarity. So I'm going to make this ID 1, then 2, then 3, and so on. This is so that if you have other races, which this NFT doesn't, but if you had, and you already wanted to use or make use of another attribute sitting inside another race, you can do so as long as you keep the ID and the structure the same. That will allow you to kind of reuse attributes throughout other races and ensuring that you have no duplicate DNA. Next, what we want to do is work out the weights. Now, I would like 50% of my collection to actually have this white V-neck t-shirt. I know it's a lot, but you have to think about the rarity, right? People want rare stuff. So let's go down to the alien and let's go and say that only about, let's think about it, 1% of our whole collection will have the alien suit. I think that is pretty special. So what we can do is we can say that this would be 1%. So we need to minus it from here. So this one would be 2 then. So if that's 2, remember we minus 1 by the invisible 0. This makes it that we have a 1% chance of getting an alien suit. Now we just need to make very sure that our index.js file, that this function over here will actually allow us to even get 100, right? And yes, it will. Because math.floor, let's just think about this, because math.floor takes it to the lowest that it can be, or the closest to the lowest. So I really hope that this can possibly reach 100. But there's something we can do to test, and how we can do that is maybe run this inside of a function. So let's just maybe open a new terminal, run node, run this, and then start typing. We can say let result is equal to this times, maybe let's make it 2, just to see if we can get the get that. Then what we want to do is we want to console.log res. Okay, console. There we go, 0. Okay, it's always going to be 0, so we technically actually want this function in here. And let's make this 2. Let's run it. So you can see we've got 1, 1, 1, 0. And I just want to make sure that, okay, I'm actually going to see if we can write a for loop for this rather, because I need to see all the possibilities. So I'm running it over and over, and I don't see 2 really popping up. And that is actually a mistake that we now need to rectify. Let's go and change this to 3, and let's see if 3 actually pops up. So I only see 1s, but I'm starting to see 2s. That's very interesting. So we need to keep that in mind when we do our rarities. That was a little bit of a silly example, but at the end of the day, it made very clear to me that this will not give us the exact value. I want to do some thorough testing and then get back to you before I make the final decision of letting you guys know what we should do and if we should even use this. After doing a little bit of research, I realized that math.floor will never work with only that 100 value. So we would actually need to take this and then at the very end plus it by 1 or plus 1, right? In order for us to get actually a true value of 100 included, all right? And that's just what we'll need to do. So I hope that everyone is looking at this tutorial today because this is a very crucial part of this program. Now, with this being said, let's go back to our config and let's go and continue our journey into creating all the rest of the rarities. We said that we want everything with alien to be only 1% of the collection, which is super rare. If we make a collection of 1,000, well, of 100, one image will be an alien thing. But if we make a collection of 1,000, then it would be 10, right? I think so. Yes, because then we have 100 and it's 10. So that's pretty cool. Let's go and determine how much percentage of weight the zombie shirt should take. Now, I want the zombie shirt to also be kind of rare, but I don't want it to be as rare as alien. Maybe it can be double rare because zombies are quite cool. So I'm going to double this, meaning that 2 minus 1 is going to give us 1. Maybe I must do it 3 minus 1, making this 2% of all the NFTs will have a zombie shirt. It doesn't mean that this 2% will account for any of the other layers, and the other layers might also have a zombie attribute, which makes it 3% having that attribute. But at the end of the day, you really want an NFT that has most of its items, these rare items. Let's go ahead and work out what we want to do for the vampire. Now I want it to double up, so 1%, 2%, and then 4%, right? So if we want 4% over here, we need to just add 4 to the 3, which is 7, and then this will give us 4% of our NFTs will have the vampire cloak, and so on and so on. So we just work it out, and then we can just carry on like this. So now, if we want it to double again, let's just make sure, because we want 1, and we do want the 2 to be there. We want a 4, that makes sense. And then for the hoodie, I mean, from here on out, it doesn't have to be that low, but I think hoodies are still cool, and I think giving it an 8% would be nice. So what we need to do is then, if we want this to be 8, we need to now take 7 and add 8 to it, right? Cool. So it's 7, and then we're going to add 8, which is what? 315. Okay, so, and this is how we're going to do it. We're now going to carry on upwards, and then we'll decide what the top NFT should be. Because think about it. We don't want the NFTs to look all naked and only have white shirts. We actually want them to look good. So we need to kind of eliminate this 50, and I'm just thinking out loud, but to me it makes sense. I mean, 50% of the NFT is probably cool to have white t-shirts. Then yellow, we need to up this a little bit more. So let's make it now 15% will have the yellow t-shirt. So we need to add 15, which is 30. And then I want to double it again to say that this should actually have 30% should be purple. But I don't want 30% to be purple, so maybe 20% will be purple. I like the purple, but I don't want too many NFTs of that. So if we want this to be 20%, we need to add 20 to this, which makes it 50. All right? And then that worked out surprisingly well, because there we have 50. So 100 minus this is 50. 50 minus 30 is 20. And then 30 minus that is, and so on, right? So here we get our percentages. And this is now indeed what will happen. Because we have now more rarities that was added, we can actually run the program and see if it actually does take on our rarity weights. Let's now run the program again and see what we get. This time I'm actually going to up the size to 10. I think we will have enough layers in order to create 10 NFTs with different t-shirts. So let's go ahead and run the program. So we need to go back to our node program and then run node index.js. And there we go. And yes, it does struggle to create 10. It created 7, so it's still busy figuring out, and it's still running in loops, and it's still breaking, but essentially not a bug, because it's just detecting that there's not enough layers, which is fine. I'm going to opt for only creating 5 NFTs, seeing that we don't have enough layers yet, but just to show you a nice example. What I want to do is actually just remove everything here so we have a clean slate, and then run the program so that it can run and create 5 NFTs. Let's look at the first one. We can see that this person has a white t-shirt on, the second one is purple, the third one is a hoodie, the fourth one is a vampire, and the fifth one is a zombie. Okay, that seems suspicious, to be honest with you. I'm going to do this again, and luckily the first one is yellow, yes, this one is that, third one is zombie, fourth one is a white t-shirt, and then we get a purple t-shirt. Now, this is, it looks suspicious, but what's happening here is we don't have enough DNA to facilitate a large amount of possibilities. So what ends up happening is, yes, this program goes and runs through all the possibilities to make sure that it has unique DNAs, because you can see the DNA is only about 2 characters long. So of course it would select each one of those attributes. So at least we can get to see how our NFTs are being built. And I must say, they look and is starting to look very, very cool. I cannot wait to share this collection with you guys and actually put it up for sale. I'm going to own some of these myself, so I'm very excited. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We still have a lot to do. What I need to do now is actually go through the rest of these layers and also add them like I did with the clothing, but add them for each one of these layers, specifying the rarity, and then we're going to mint and run the final program. I'm going to go ahead and do that so you don't have to look at me sitting and working out each rarity, but at least I'll get back to you once I've done all of these layers. So I am finally done with setting up all the layers. I am very proud of the end result, and I'll show you this right now. Just to recap, I went ahead and added each layer with its attributes to the layers file. I then also in the layers file gave it a name, added each element, specified the weight, and made sure that the path and the name is correct, as well as started the IDs from 0, going all the way to the last element, which in this case was 6. This I reiterated for each layer, and then I just closed them all like this, so it's nice and neat. And now I'm going to run an example for you guys. So I'll run the program by running node space index.js, and here's the magic. If we look in the outputs file now, you can see the amazing characters that's been created. Oh, that looks just awesome. That's been created via the program. I think these characters look super dope, super cool, and I can't wait to actually now go ahead and put them on the Polygon network. The last thing that we need to do is just play around with the background. I'm not sure if I want colors. You can do that easily, especially if you're using the generated one and not a layer, and just go and play around with how we gen the colors. Instead of generating the colors over there, we can probably specify a color. Now you can use hash colors where FFF is white and 000 is black. So if I opt for a very black color, the results will look like this, which I think actually looks brilliant if you ask me. So I was thinking if I should go for these black backgrounds on these characters, and in all honesty I really like them, so I think I might. Now It might look a bit emo, but that's not kind of the reason why I want to go for these characters to have a black background. It's just because they stand out a little bit better. We might go for a darker gray, especially because one of the headgears, especially the zombie's hat, is black, but you can still see that it has some curves and it is gray at the top, so it would still work. I think I'm going to go for this. This looks clean, neat, it looks very eerie, it looks very cool, and you can see that these characters really come to life. I hope you guys enjoyed the series thus far. What I'm going to do now is basically set up my program to run. Now, the last thing that we need to make sure of is just making sure that we have everything set up here correctly for the amount of collections we want to mint. We want to create a collection size of only 1,000 images. And I'm going to say that it should end at 1,000. It needs to start from 1 and go to 1,000. For our base image URI, I already have bought a domain called Nerdy Coder Clones. So it's nerdy coder clones. And I think it was .online. And I will place my metadata in the metadata folder. Perfect. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to verify that this is correct. But once this is all correct, I'm also going to add a beautiful description for each NFT. I am going to run the program. Now, if I run this program right now, it's going to start to mint 1,000 NFTs. I am not sure if all these different layers will be able to create 1,000 different NFTs, but that is something I'll find out. Next, what I want to show you just as a side note is to always make sure that your metadata being exported is correct. I noticed that in the videos, people had questions and saying that their metadata is not showing up correctly. You need to make sure that your attributes and all the keys in here are lowercase. Don't make it traits with an uppercase T or uppercase V for the value. Keep all your keys. And when I talk about keys, these are the blue words in here. They should all be lowercase. This metadata seems perfect apart from the description, which I'm going to change. And obviously the image's base will be my new base that I've added in the config over here for the base image. And once I'm ready with that, once I'm happy with this, I'm going to start minting my collection. And then what we'll do is we'll go and upload this collection to the server, and then we will go ahead and create the contract. Then we'll create the base Dapp, and then we'll hook everything up. So stick around for the next video where we will be doing that.